The first sign of trouble came not with alarms, but with silence. Marcus Trent blinked at the shifting nav paths on the holo display, lines of gravitational vectors curving like threads of taut silk across the projection dome above his head. He reached up to adjust one, inputting a minor correction to the shipment route bound for the Dominion sector. His hand trembled slightly. He chalked it up to low caffeine, nothing unusual on third shift. Then the tremble turned to a blur. His vision dimmed, legs buckled, and he collapsed hard onto the grated floor, the console's glow flickering out as his body slumped forward. Station emergency protocols engaged instantly. The console pinged, auto-flagging his bio readings, and within minutes, a med drone arrived to stabilize and transport him to Medbay Theta. The corridors buzzed past in a blur of sterile lights and hushed murmurs. He regained consciousness just as they laid him on the diagnostic slab. Dr. Kelvar hovered nearby, multi-limbed, smooth-skinned, and calmly methodical. The station's chief medic, Kelvar, rarely showed outward emotion. His kind found emotional displays equivalent to shouting in sacred halls. But even his steady tone could not soften the blow that followed. "Marcus, your lungs are exhibiting acute fibrotic scarring. Rapid onset. I cross-reference the patterns. It's consistent with red veil exposure." Marcus sat up, coughing lightly. "Red veil? That's the fungal stuff from the asteroid miners, right? But I haven't left the station in over 6 months. I've never even touched raw ore." Kelvar adjusted the scanner, his narrow eyes narrowing further. "It is not necessary to handle ore directly. Aerosolized spores can survive in trace atmospheres. The scarring rate is aggressive. I estimate 7 Earth days before systemic failure begins." Marcus tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, rattling cough. "That's ridiculous. I'm fine." "Well, I was fine until 5 minutes ago." Kelvar folded one of his forelimbs. "Symptoms remain deceptively mild until the final stage. The fainting spell indicates oxygen levels have already declined by 14%. There is no treatment. Human physiology does not respond to antifungal cytostatics the way mine or the Tessarans does." Marcus swung his legs off the table. "Then find something that does respond. There has to be something. A misdiagnosis, a contaminated readout, anything." I repeated the scans with 2 devices. "I triple-checked your baseline from last month's health audit. This is not an error, Marcus. I advise you begin preparing message packets for your family. I will notify command to arrange a palliative care suite." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I'm not dying, not in a week, and I'm definitely not spending my time in some glass bubble with soothing lights and plasma lullabies." Kelvar tilted his head, confused. "You would rather spend it on shift? Someone has to pilot the Dominion shipment past the G-class gravity surge. None of the Agredi crew are certified. If it doesn't leave by cycle's end, they'll call it sabotage. You will not live to see the shipment arrive. Maybe. But if I quit now, they'll all think it's because of the spores. Let me work." Kelvar's species didn't argue. Not out loud. He simply documented the disagreement in his medical logs and discharged Marcus with a portable O2 meter and supplemental oxygen gel tabs 2 per day, more only with monitored vitals. Marcus returned to the nav center before his heartbeat even stabilized. 3 days passed. The first day was denial. He coughed during calibration and blamed the dry, recycled air. He stumbled slightly while hauling a data module from the lower tier, muttering about vertigo. No one questioned it. The second day brought breathlessness. During a session fine-tuning the Dominion mineral payload trajectory, he found himself sitting every half hour, glancing at the oxygen meter. The numbers dropped slowly but steadily. On the third day, his vision blurred again, not to black, just a haze, like looking through damp glass. He swallowed an oxygen gel in front of Ensign Rollo and waved off the young Argid's concerned stare. "New brand of protein bars," he lied. "Tastes like aluminum." But even the Argid could see something was off. Meanwhile, the rest of the station was unraveling in subtler ways. Low-grade flickers ran through the lighting systems at irregular intervals. Atmospheric regulators dipped and recovered. Cold spots appeared in hallways. Life support systems underwent full recalibration twice within a solar cycle. Tech officers muttered about power surges and aging conduits, but nothing concrete emerged. And in the background, a low-level diplomatic panic simmered. Dominion envoy Hauser made contact on day 4. Her carapace gleamed like lacquered obsidian, and her words translated cleanly through the system AI carried a barely masked impatience. "Where is the certified human navigator? Why is our shipment not underway?" Marcus stood behind the comm operator and raised a hand. "Still alive and working on it." Hauser narrowed her eyes. "Your biosigns are fluctuating. You are unfit." "I'm under observation, not unfit. The nav path is sensitive, and unless you'd like to detour into a red dwarf's gravity well, I suggest you let me finish." She hissed, which the AI politely muted. After the call ended, Marcus sat down hard, back to the wall, breath shallow. He rubbed his chest absently. The oxygen gel was less effective now, like trying to drink through a clogged straw. Kelvar visited him that evening. He didn't scold or remove Marcus from duty, just stood beside him in silence while the console ran a diagnostic loop. After a few moments, he spoke. "There is something I must clarify. When I told you there was no treatment, that was true by our standards. But there is an outlier case in our archives. One human with similar scarring survived." Marcus turned sharply. "You're telling me this now?" "In our culture, false hope is considered unethical, cruel even. To tell a patient they might survive when odds say otherwise only prolongs mental anguish." Marcus stared. "But you knew someone made it." Kelvar nodded once. "The spores affected that individual differently. We never confirmed why. A blood factor, perhaps, but I could not be certain, and uncertainty is—" "You don't get to decide what I can handle," Marcus snapped. "If there's even a sliver of a chance, I deserve to know." "I am sorry. I thought I was protecting you. Next time, let me protect myself." He left the medbay without looking back. Later that night, somewhere between sleep and another fevered O2 tab, Marcus dreamed of tingling in his lungs, a warm itch, like something shifting under the ribs. When he awoke, drenched in sweat, the sensation was gone. But the room's lights were out. The air was heavy, too heavy. He stumbled to the wall console, no power. The backup lights were dead too. In the corridor, emergency lamps flickered faint red and then extinguished completely. The station was in full blackout. And Marcus, lungs failing, was the only one awake when it happened. The corridor tasted like static. Marcus braced himself against the wall, each breath shallow and whistling. The portable oxygen unit he'd rigged into a mask hissed faintly, feeding precious molecules into his bloodstream just fast enough to stave off collapse. But the meter was already in the yellow. In 5 minutes, maybe 6, he'd be running on the dregs. The blackout wasn't isolated. As he staggered down the corridor, passing 2 silent repair drones, it became clear the outage had hit multiple sectors. No hum of life support, no airflow from the vents, no blinking lights on the status panels, just the soft whisper of his own dragging footsteps and the rhythmic beep of his heart monitor clipped to his forearm. When he reached the engineering ring, he found Lieutenant Salkin hunched over a dead console, swearing in clipped syllables. The reptilian officer turned his scaled head at Marcus's approach, eyes narrowing at the sight of him. "You should be in medbay," Salkin hissed. "This is no place for the half-dead." "Spare me," Marcus wheezed. "What's the extent?" "Main power relay tripped. Secondary junctions across modules 12 through 17 are unresponsive. We've got partial grid failure, no internal comms, and external signals down. Emergency oxygen tanks haven't deployed. We're blind, deaf, and suffocating." "Manual resets?" Marcus asked, wiping his forehead. "I sent a crew to the east conduit ladder, but they're trapped behind a sealed bulkhead. No power, no override." Marcus steadied himself against the hatch. "Give me access to the maintenance shaft. I'll trace the junction manually." "You'll collapse before you're halfway through," Salkin growled. "Then leave me where I fall." Salkin didn't argue further. He keyed open the emergency lever and motioned toward the narrow service tunnel behind it. It was stifling inside. Heat radiated from the overhead ducts, and the crawlspace felt narrower than he remembered. Every meter was an effort, every breath like pulling air through cloth. He moved in a rhythm: 3 crawls, rest. 3 more, rest. Somewhere in the dark, a sharp metallic tick echoed behind the walls, like something chewing. At the 3rd junction box, He found what he hadn't expected: a heat bloom. His scanner, barely operational in the blackout, picked up a localized thermal surge. Junction boxes didn't emit that kind of heat under failure conditions. He cracked the housing open with a maintenance wrench and aimed his flashlight into the cavity. And there they were. Clusters of pulsing red-orange growths, fine as hair, webbed across the wiring harness like neural threads. They shimmered slightly in the beam, retracting and extending with faint twitching motions. Marcus recoiled instinctively, but didn't move far. He had seen spore colonies before in training vids, what miners inhaled after a breach in containment, what left their lungs like burnt leaves. But this was different. The spores weren't dormant. They were active, feeding not on organics, but electricity. He traced several filaments running down toward the conduit's mainline, rooted like vines in circuitry. And the tingling. The heat in his chest from the night before. It clicked into place with sudden, terrifying clarity. They had been inside him. Somehow, some way, the spores had entered his system, and instead of attacking his lung tissue outright, they'd metabolized something else. Trace metals? Ions? It didn't matter. What mattered was that they had left, migrated from blood to circuit. That's why he was still alive. He sat back, heart hammering. The colony was using the station, now infesting it slowly, draining energy like a parasite. And in doing so, they'd spared him. Not out of mercy, but necessity. He was their ride-in. He tapped his oxygen gauge. Almost red. He pulled a diagnostic node from his tool belt and jammed it into the box, initiating a burnback loop. It would isolate the colony here, at least temporarily, and reboot local systems. The spores flinched violently as the charge initiated, curling into themselves. The lights along the shaft flickered, then stabilized. That would have to be enough for now. He crawled back toward the main passage, head spinning, lungs barely functioning. Twice he stopped to retch. The third time, he passed out completely. When Marcus came to, he was in medbay again. Kelvar loomed beside him, scanning silently. The air smelled of antiseptic and electrostatic resin. You were unconscious for 14 minutes. We nearly intubated you. Marcus swallowed hard. Don't bother. I know what's happening now. Kelvar leaned in. Explain. The spores aren't killing me. Not yet. They were feeding on something in my blood metal trace. Maybe nickel. Maybe lithium. But they've moved on. I found them in the conduit junctions. They're feeding on the station's power. Kelvar paused. A transfer of biological matter to electrical systems is highly unusual. They're fungi, Marcus rasped. Adaptation's kind of their thing. You should not be alive. Marcus coughed into his sleeve. There was blood, this time. Tell that to the thing growing in your wiring. The next few hours were triage. Salkin's crew worked to isolate infested power nodes, while Station Command rerouted emergency protocols to avoid triggering the colony further. Dominion Envoy Hauser made contact again, this time in person, demanding to know why the shipment was delayed further. Marcus met her from a medical gurney, oxygen mask strapped tight. I found your contamination, he said flatly. Your ore was tainted with red veil. The spores infiltrated our systems. They're alive in our wiring. Hauser stiffened. That is not possible. We have footage. Samples. Cross-check your cargo manifests. If you didn't scan for biocontaminants during your last shipment, you exposed every station on this route. You dare accuse us of biological sabotage? I dare accuse you of laziness. The envoy stalked out. Marcus coughed so hard it shook the bed. That night, he lay quietly, as Kelvar reviewed the medical data again, this time with a different lens. You were correct, Kelvar admitted. Your blood contains elevated cerium levels, likely from your time in reactor maintenance rotations 3 years ago. The spores must have found it more metabolically suitable than lung tissue. Marcus chuckled faintly. Toxic heavy metals. Guess it finally came in handy. You will still experience scarring. Lung capacity is reduced by at least 30%. Full recovery is unlikely. I can live with that. Kelvar folded his arms. I was wrong. Not just about withholding the survival case. About you continuing to work. Wasn't about pride, Marcus said. My sister's colony ship is waiting for that mineral shipment. Without the shielding, those ores help refine, They'll be sitting near a Class B solar flare, with nothing but recycled carbon fiber between them and radiation. Kelvar blinked slowly. You never mentioned this. You never asked. Kelvar inclined his head. Then it was not self-preservation that kept you alive. It was responsibility. No, Marcus replied, eyes half closing. It was dumb luck and bad lungs. The first thing Marcus noticed after waking was the difference in sound. Not the sterile hush of medbay, but the low mechanical hum of the station running normally again. It was a relief, but also a warning. The blackout had ended, but the problem hadn't. His lungs still ached. Every breath felt like a debate between effort and reward. A cannula ran under his nose, pumping in steady oxygen. He sat upright with effort, peeling off a biosensor patch and glancing around. Kelvar stood near the window panel, speaking with Commander Yulson. No, the spore colony is stable but still active. Containment will be difficult if we don't maintain power flow to those sections. Yulson's tone was clipped. And you're telling me they migrated from a human bloodstream into a junction box? That isn't how biology works. It is when the biology doesn't care what you believe, Marcus rasped, causing both of them to turn. Kelvar approached first. You should rest. I've been resting for 12 hours. I can't stay here while we're sitting on a power-eating mushroom hive. Yulson crossed her arms. You're not cleared for duty. Good, Marcus said. Then I'm free to go wherever I want without getting called insubordinate. Kelvar made a noise halfway between a sigh and a click, his version of frustration. Your pulmonary capacity is still at 63%. You can walk, barely, that's all. I don't need to run a marathon. I need to check the nav array. Yulson looked skeptical. You still think you're in any shape to help? I'm the only one who can verify that Dominion path before the gravity slingshot point. Unless you've got a crash course certification program you forgot to mention. She didn't argue. Instead, she handed him a secure tablet. You're doing this from medbay. If your O2 drops below 75, I pull you off. Clear? Crystal. While Marcus reviewed the nav data, he noticed something strange. Not in the shipment vectors, but in the power logs Kelvar had included alongside the bioscans. The energy drain pattern matched not only the junctions they'd found infested, but also an earlier string of phantom anomalies logged 3 weeks prior. Did you look at these pre-event logs? Marcus asked, holding the tablet up. Kelvar leaned in. I assumed they were early system hiccups. They're not. Look, same distribution pattern, just lower amplitude. The spores were here before my symptoms started, which means they came in earlier than we thought. Kelvar's eyes narrowed. How much earlier? Maybe a month. Before the last Dominion shipment even docked. He sat back, winded but alert. I didn't get exposed through the spores migrating into me. I was already carrying them, but they didn't activate until something changed. Kelvar crossed the room to a database terminal. You're suggesting the spores were dormant. Exactly. And then got triggered when the station's power cycles changed. Or maybe when I worked in the sensor bay last month, remember that containment leak? I brushed a crate that hadn't cleared quarantine. Kelvar typed rapidly. That crate was tagged from Docking Bay 2. Dominion supplied, declared sterile. You didn't file exposure. Because I didn't think it was exposure, Marcus said. I thought it was just dust. Kelvar was silent for a long moment. Then, this means we may have more carriers. More spores. Station Command ordered a full internal inspection. Dominion representatives were denied re-entry during the sweep, pending contamination analysis. The problem? The spores weren't behaving like anything previously cataloged. They didn't spread uniformly. They didn't replicate visibly. And they weren't killing anyone else. At least not yet. Marcus, weak as he was, watched from medbay as teams traced faint trails of bioelectric feedback through auxiliary panels. No large colonies yet, just threads and webbing, like the precursor stage of a neural network. He wasn't surprised when Kelvar returned later with a grim expression. They've colonized the long-range comm dish. Marcus blinked. The dish? Power output there is strong. It drew them in. Can we burn it out? No. We tried a brief thermal pulse. They retracted, then regrew after power was restored. They're self-preserving. Marcus nodded slowly. They're not parasites. What? They're infrastructure seekers. They don't just feed, they migrate to where they can function best. That's why they moved out of me. I was a temporary host. Kelvar looked disturbed. Are you suggesting intelligence? Not conscious intelligence. Just optimized behavior, like bees, or mold that grows toward music vibrations. Yulson joined them then. We've got a dilemma. If we report this infestation to the Dominion, protocol says to shut down the station, destroy infected infrastructure, and isolate for 2 months. That includes abandoning this outpost. Marcus stared. They'll destroy everything, including the samples, including the data, including the shipment, Yulson added. And your sister's colony shielding won't arrive in time. Marcus leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. And if we don't report it? Kelvar said nothing. For 2 days, the debate raged behind closed doors. Marcus wasn't part of those meetings, not officially, but word filtered back to him in whispers from engineering officers and short-faced technicians. Some believed the spores were a fluke containable, maybe even controllable. Others feared them as an invasive threat, a ticking bomb inside the station's walls. A few, mostly the bioresearchers, wanted to isolate and study them. Dominion protocol be damned. Marcus didn't argue. He spent those days recovering, slowly. Oxygen therapy helped he could now walk short distances without gasping. But the scarring remained, and Kelvar was frank. It always would. He'd lost function. Permanently. His lungs would never be what they were. And yet, he lived. On the 7th day, the day he should have been dead, he walked unaided to the nav center. The staff there fell into a hush as he approached. Marcus keyed into the console, pulled up the final route plan, and initiated transmission to the ore tug hovering just outside the station. The shipment left precisely on time. That night, Marcus stood by the observation window just beyond medbay. The stars beyond shimmered pale gold. He leaned lightly against the wall. Kelvar joined him after a moment. The official report went to Central this afternoon, Kelvar said. We included everything. The spores, the migration, your case. Marcus nodded. And the Dominion? They've requested an emergency tribunal. We expect political fallout within the week. Marcus didn't look away from the stars. The right choice? Kelvar hesitated. There is no singular right choice. But it was the honest one. They stood in silence for a long moment. Marcus finally said, You know what saved me? Cerium-laced blood and poor ventilation? No, a bad maintenance habit. I wiped my gloves on my uniform after brushing that crate. Should have filed a contamination log. Didn't. Kelvar tilted his head. That is not medical best practice. No, Marcus agreed. But it's human best practice, forgetting small things, making dumb decisions, and then crawling through a station half dead to fix them. Kelvar didn't respond for a long time. Then, very quietly, Thank you for surviving. Marcus smiled faintly, exhausted. Someone had to. The official Dominion Tribunal convened 10 days later via subspace relay. No one dared host it in person, too many unknowns, too much spore paranoia. The tribunal's image appeared as a sterile gray hologram in the station's command conference room, 3 shimmering Dominion figures seated in a perfect triangle, unmoving, save for the faint ripple of their breathing carapaces. Marcus sat in the back, still on oxygen support, not because he needed it constantly now, but because the strain of walking the full ring corridor just to be present had pushed him to his limit. He'd lost almost 20 pounds. His uniform hung loose. His breathing was measured in shallow sips. But he was alive, and he had something to say. Kelvar stood at the center of the chamber, presenting the station's findings. He showed scans of the spore colonies, heat maps of electrical drain, the timeline of Marcus's exposure and recovery, and a sobering projection. If the spores were carried unknowingly on mineral ore across other Dominion hubs, there could already be dozens of minor infestations, each one slow, quiet, and feeding. Hajar, the Dominion envoy, now served as one of the tribunal officers. She didn't look at Marcus once. You accuse us of endangering this station, Hajar said. But you have no proof the spores originated in our shipments. We traced containment gaps to crates tagged at your mining outpost on Beltex 9, Kelvar replied evenly. Internal Dominion cargo, no third-party handlers. That is circumstantial. It's also the only data we have. Another tribunal member spoke, its voice slower. Had the human not interfered, would your colony still be operational? Kelvar didn't hesitate. No. Silence followed. Marcus felt the weight of it. Not hostility, not accusation, calculation. The tribunal was doing what the Dominion always did, measuring utility, risk versus gain. He didn't envy them, but he didn't trust them either. Hazar turned at last toward Marcus. Her segmented voice cut through the air. You endured a pathogen lethal to your kind. You recovered from terminal scarring, and you traced the infestation before our own analysts flagged it. Why did you continue working? Marcus lifted the oxygen cannula off his face, just for a second. He wanted his voice to carry without the hiss behind it. Because I had a job to do, and because you don't wait for a fire to reach the roof before grabbing the extinguisher. Another silence. Would you advise other humans to do the same? Hazar asked. No, Marcus said. Most wouldn't survive it, and it nearly killed me. But if I hadn't tried, my sister's colony ship would have lost its shielding. Thousands of people. You think I was reckless? I wasn't. I was careful. I was scared, and I worked anyway. That seemed to land. The tribunal recessed without a verdict. Dominion style. They would deliberate privately, issue a communiqué later. Politics didn't care about who survived, just who could be blamed. 3 weeks passed. Marcus continued rehab under Kelvar's supervision. Short walks became longer. He relearned how to control his breathing, slow in, slower out. He slept upright now, on a tilted cot, and still needed supplemental oxygen during exertion. His lungs weren't improving much more. This is likely your baseline, Kelvar told him gently after a retest. 68% lung function, chronic shortness of breath during strain, occasional hypoxia if overexerted. Marcus nodded. So no more triathlon training. I would not recommend it. There was no cure for what he'd survived, only management. But he'd stopped hoping for a miracle. What he had now was enough: life, breath, and a second chance. The spores remained. Burning them out would destroy too much infrastructure. The solution had been cooperative. They rerouted power lines away from the colonies, sealed those sectors, and installed ultraviolet emitters along nearby junctions to deter spread. The spores stayed put, feeding quietly, not expanding. And, strangely, the systems they occupied began functioning more efficiently, almost like the spores learned to integrate instead of consume. Kelvar suggested it might be symbiotic. Marcus didn't disagree, but it made things murky. The Dominion hadn't demanded shutdown, not yet, but they had classified all related data. Marcus wasn't allowed to mention them in any official report. The spores weren't a threat, but neither were they public knowledge. Command wanted to keep it that way. 1 month after the tribunal, Marcus returned to the nav center. The room looked the same, but he saw it differently now. Every conduit, every screen, every panel, a reminder of what had nearly killed him and what he'd helped preserve. Ensign Rollo greeted him cautiously. You sure you're cleared for this? Just observing, Marcus said, easing into the support chair. Not driving today. He watched the screens for a while, monitored energy drift in the outer gravitic rings, then pulled up the diagnostics for Junction 14, the first spore site he'd discovered. The energy flow was stable, healthier than before. A thought itched at the back of his mind. He stood slowly, walked to the maintenance hatch, and opened it. There, behind the thermal insulation, the faint shimmer of the colony still pulsed, slow, warm, and steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a data chip. Not official, not authorized, just something he'd been compiling privately. A record of the spore behavior. Migration maps, power interaction logs, the way they'd responded to containment, how they'd chosen to stop consuming once they'd found a stable source. He slid the chip into a sealed capsule and tucked it into a wall conduit behind the access panel. Not because he planned to hide it, but because someone someday might need it again, and the station might not be around forever. He sealed the hatch. That night, Kelvar joined him on the observation deck. Stars wheeled slowly beyond the transparent arc. Marcus leaned on the rail, breath shallow but content. Kelvar brought no scans. No data pads. Just 2 mugs of steam kettle tea bitter. Weirdly floral, but growing on him. "You will not fully recover," Kelvar said. "But you've adapted quickly. I had good help." Kelvar tilted his head. "Do you still believe I should have told you about the rare survival case?" Marcus took a sip of tea, thinking. "Yes, but I understand why you didn't. In my culture, we're taught that knowing you are dying frees you from fear, allows focus. In mine, knowing you might live gives you something to fight for." Kelvar nodded slowly. "We are both correct, and both wrong." Marcus smiled. "Sounds like diplomacy." They sat quietly, watching a passing freighter flicker against the backdrop of deep space. Somewhere below them, the spores hummed silently in the wires, thriving without spreading, alive without invading. Marcus closed his eyes, breathing carefully. He wasn't dying anymore, but he'd never forget that he almost had. And what he'd found, what they'd all found, wasn't just a mystery or a miracle. It was a reminder that life, even microscopic and terrifying, finds a way. And sometimes, if you're stubborn enough to keep showing up, you get to keep living too.